Hello, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. And yes, we're still in Zoom format. Today, we'll break down the results of the November election with former Santa Clara County Supervisor Ken Yeager and Huy Tran. Huy is an attorney in San Jose, and he also ran a strong third place in the Berryessa Council District, which we'll be talking about. We'll look at other key races and their significance for the future of politics in the Valley. And that's what's coming up on Valley Politics. Welcome everyone, and welcome Huy Tran and Ken Yeager. Ken, before we get started on our analysis, tell us what you've been up to since you retired from the Board of Supervisors.
Well, you know, Terry, I've gone back to teaching at San Jose State in the political science department, which is what I was doing before I elected office. And then also I'm an executive director of the Baymack Community Foundation. And our big project that we're working on is Queer Silicon Valley, which is a 50-year history of the LGBTQ struggle here in Santa Clara County.
And you've got the website up for Queer Silicon Valley, and it's an excellent source of a really important part of the history of the Valley. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, all one word, queersiliconvalley.org.
Okay, so down to business. We were going to start with you, and we're going to take a look at some of the local races in the November election, starting with San Jose Council District 4, which is Berryessa and North San Jose. We ran for that council seat and came in a strong third. Congratulations on that. Wish it had been better. Challenger Dave Cohen beat incumbent Land Deep in that district, according to the votes we've got as of today, 51.3% to 48.7%. So, what do you think happened there?
Well, there are a couple of points I think produced the results that we saw, right? One is that Lund definitely has some history in the district. I mean, if you look at how the vote breakdowns went and look at how the precincts voted, the precincts in the west, meaning Alviso and North San Jose, voted for David. If you look on the right, on the east, towards the hills, closer to where David lives, they also went for David. And then in the center of the district, which you see a lot of API neighborhoods and enclaves, they tended to go for Lund. The dynamics, I think, played out here definitely are geography, race, and some of the history of Councilmember Landiev's actions as well, right? I mean, in the West, a lot of folks did not like his decision around Orchard School. You also have a lot of mobile home communities in the western part of the district, in Alviso and in North San Jose, many of whom did not see Councilmember Landiev as an ally. And in the east, David has built his home in Berryessa for years, and I think he built a lot of personal relationships in that area and built support there as well. The strength that you see where Landiev is definitely around the areas such as, I would say, like H Mart, right? Areas running along Lundy and Sierra, where there's many API neighborhoods, many API families, and I think the representation issue is still very important for many of the communities that exists here in D4. Yeah.
Ken, do you have anything to add to that?
No, but it was interesting with all of the attacks that both challengers had. I think David Cohen, of his own reputation and background, that those attacks weren't nearly as effective on him because people knew him and his record.
There were some pretty mean attacks. There was huge independent expenditure in this race, almost $1 million. Third of that came from labor, which was pro-Cohen, anti-Deep. They did some anti-mailings and also some pro-mailings for Cohen and some comparison mailings. But a business interest spent 2 times that amount, almost $600,000. That's a lot of money in a city council race. I would also add, though, I think this is a factor in Cohen's victory, surely a big factor. Labor did mailings, but they also did 38,000 phone calls in that district alone on behalf of Cohen. And volunteers dropped off thousands of campaign brochures at the door. So Labor's traditional grassroots kind of campaigning, well, they couldn't do it as much as normal because of COVID still surely made a difference there.
No, absolutely. I mean, especially when we look to at the fact that the pandemic made traditional campaigning very challenging. The ability to get boots on the ground and to make that personal connections when you have that opportunity, it definitely means a lot more, right? But you can also see how social media played out onto this, right? I mean, look at the spending that hit from the people that supported Landia. I mean, my Facebook page was plastered with social media ads. I was seeing a ton of Facebook ads and whatnot come up through Innovation for All, which I believe is called Guardino's group. The SVO was spending a lot of money on social media as well. And the one thing I think needs to be made clear here, right? Like, this is not a blowout, right? 51 to 49, or is small margins. It definitely points to the fact that there's an incumbency effect. I think money absolutely plays a role in this. But at the end of the day here, what we saw was, I think there was dissatisfaction with the incumbent. And I think we also saw community rallying around a challenger who had been in the community for a long time. And what we get is, kind of like a lot of dissatisfaction with some organizing, beating the incumbency effect, and a lot of money.
2% is a blowout in District 4 compared to what's happened in the last few elections when won one of them by 13 votes, not 2%.
Very true.
Well, let's turn to the other big runoff race for City Council. And in that one, Dev Davis, the incumbent, beat her challenger, Jake Tunkel, roughly 54% to 46%. So that is a bigger chunk. And Ken, that's your turf. Actually, that's your old district. So is this the outcome you expected? What do you think happened here?
Yeah, it is what I was expected. It was interesting. In the primary, Councilmember Davis got only 48% of the vote. And so that led to the runoff. And I know that when I was on this show in March talking about the election, I was surprised that she didn't get to that 50%.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Landiep didn't either, but it's a little unusual not to win. And Jake came in second with 28%. So that sort of left 24% of the vote that was up for grabs, if you will. Dev ended up getting 54, as you said. So she got a 6% gain out of that 24%. And Jake got 18%. So he really sort of increased his name ID and his margin. It just wasn't quite enough. As we had said about how much money had come into this, there was that great study that was done on financing in the 2018 campaign in San Jose, and revealed what we all know: the candidate who spends the most money wins, and that was certainly the case here, particularly when it came to independent expenditures, mainly against Jake. He, as I sort of mentioned before, he just didn't really have much of a track record. It was interesting that he had listed himself proudly as a Green Party member, and I think that was sort of trying to get the more left, younger, more hip kind of votes. But I'm not sure Willow Glen and Rose Garden sort of went along with that. But then his opponents made it sound like a Green Party was a socialist, and which is absurd. But it was plastered on all the things was he's a Green Party, and he wants to cut police and he wants to raise taxes, sort of those kind of messages. All the big players were involved in this, big dollars with the California Real Estate Association of Realtors, California Apartment Association, Silicon Valley Organization, the POA, Innovation for Everybody, all putting big money into this. And obviously I got all of those mailings. And we saw a little bit of that tone that happened at the very end with the racist picture that they had posted with the African Americans protesting.
That's the SVO posting.
The SVO posted. And so I was looking at some of the old, not the old, like, a couple days, literature that they were sending out. And it had that thread to it. Jake Tonkel's Green Party plan will prevent police from responding to 911 calls, including home burglaries and auto thefts. And so you see this whole police do not cross kind of stuff. So they guess decided that they were going to take it and blow it up as far as they could, and then with their racist ad, and then really the incredible backlash, thankfully, that has happened because of it. Terry, you and I have been doing this for a long time, and I don't ever remember somebody really getting that injured from a negative ad, and then really just blowing up the Silicon Valley organization with Matt Meg, their executive director, resigning. Deb Davis gave back the money that she had received from the SVO in the primary and the general, and certainly had denounced it as well. So the campaign just took a real ugly turn, but I think there was undercurrents of that happening even before that.
Yeah, Huy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, the earlier point that Ken made about how Jake was focusing on, more progressive young voters. I mean, that really showed in his team itself, right? He built a team of dozens of people, many who are in college, some who are recent graduates and young professionals, and they worked hard. I don't think the fact that Jake built up that much momentum is a fluke, right? When we see young people ready to hit the streets, they were working hard every week to produce the content that his campaign was able to put out. Honestly, I looked at that campaign and I thought that there is definitely some strong organizing going there. And if these young folks feel that motivation and passion, you're going to see a big sea change in San Jose politics in 2 to 4 years.
I think that's
I think he was trying to ride that wave that was happening in San Jose with the protest of the George Floyd murder, that there was this, upswell of young people. I know I really felt it in my classes at San Jose State. They were eager to get in politics more than ever before. And if you think of some of the candidates who had won across the country, beating old-time, members of Congress, I think there was the sense that they could do it, that there was enough of a groundswell to get them through.
Yeah, and I agree with Huy about the young volunteer base in Jake's campaign. Had it not been for the pandemic, that could have been much more effective if they'd really been able to do much more person-to-person voter contact, but they were constrained by that. So let's hope they stay engaged. It's a really positive outcome, I think, for the city. Just, I would add a couple of comments. In this race, about $1 million was spent in independent expenditures. Ken mentioned what some of them are. The most ironic one, I thought, Ken, was the POA, the Police Officers Association, attacking Jake Tunkel for wanting to raise taxes when, as far as I know, police wages and pensions are paid by taxes. So I'm not sure that's really productive for them in the long term. Labor spent about $165,000 in this one, but business and the POA and others spent over $700,000, so way outspent. Between them all, my sample house contact in the Rose Garden got 23 mailers in this race alone, 23 mailers. So that's a lot of mail, but there was also a lot of digital campaigning, as we pointed out in District 4. Finally, Labor did 50,000 phone calls on behalf of Jake Tunkel in that race and drop walked thousands of brochures at households. So Labor, once again, was a factor, which again could have been more effective if they'd really been able to do person-to-person contact. We need to go on to some other races, but I want to mention two other things before we get there. One is, just to go back to the money piece, $3 million altogether for 2 city council races. $3 million, Ken, we've been around a long time. That's like for the whole city, for all the races in the past and more. So that's just astonishing. $1 million by the candidates themselves, which is a lot. $2 million in independent expenditures. About a quarter of that, a quarter of that was labor. The rest were business associated PACs, political action committees. So guys, what do you think this means for the future of San Jose politics? Yeah.
Well, if I can jump in, I mean, for me, I started seeing this actually in 2016 when on the campaign between Osh and Madison, where we just saw millions of dollars kind of being dropped in. And honestly, I think that's kind of redefining how this whole thing works. I mean, campaigning, I think, we always kind of say that, there's only two ways to win a campaign, right? It's either through people or it's through money, right? And we're kind of starting to see this repeatedly, where you get the power of money just really clashing, going head on against the power of just people organizing, right? And this is not to say that labor is not spending money. Clearly they are, right? But as you said, Terry, labor is producing people to go walk, to call, to drop lit, right? To do these things. And when we see like the groups that have more money, like SVO or Innovation for All, which I think is new, right? They're just spending money, right? And they're just dropping it like it's nothing. So and I'm not sure if this is going to change anytime soon, just because of the way our laws are set up. But it really does appear that this is going to become a continuing dynamic where you're going to have a ton of money being spent from labor, from business and all. But you're going to have one group that's really focused on, boots on the ground kind of mobilization, versus the other side where, you're just going to see dollars spent like you're breathing. It's just going to be flying through the air.
Ken, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the positions are just hardening here in ways that they haven't before. And when you look at all these candidates, very different positions. I guess one of the interesting ones was the single family housing zoning and how much that was a play. And so now all of a sudden you get the realtors, the apartment association, you get all of these housing developers involved in this because they don't really want to change any of that. And then you have the Dev Davis on the other side, who has sort of said, no, I'm not for what they're calling opportunity zoning. And so, all of a sudden now a lot of money is involved. It's a real issue that I think the city of San Jose has to sort of figure out what it's going to do, particularly since it needs more affordable housing. But the lines are drawn. And as you had said, Terry, I mean, when I ran 20 years ago, there just wasn't this kind of independent expenditures. It was really how much the candidate themselves could raise. And so some of that money came that way. But at that point, it was $500, and that was about as much, influence as you had. But I do worry about the future, and I do worry about the mayor's race that's going to come up in 2 years, which I just think is going to be an incredible blowout.
It has to have a sort of chilling effect on people thinking about running for office. If you've got to raise that kind of money or affiliate with some of these independent expenditure committees that will support you. I want to turn to another kind of overview question, Ken, and that is what effect is this going to have on the balance on the council between the more labor-friendly 5 votes we have now and the mayor's coalition on the other side?
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why, or yet another reason why there was so much money that was involved in here. You could certainly see the Carl Gardino, Sam Liccardo, Tom McHenry, going back even that far, sort of coalition that has really had, has held power here in Santa Clara County, San Jose, for many years. The fact that now that has switched, so it seems, from 6-5 to 5-6 for the mayor. I can't ever remember a mayor losing a majority of votes on a city council. And so it really means that it could be great disruption and a lot of uncertainty, which people don't like in politics, particularly developers. They sort of want to know how things are going to go one way or the other. But the fact that you have the 5 Latinx council members, and now you've got David Cohen as well. I don't know why David wouldn't sort of be part of that coalition. So hang on to your hats. We'll see if we have, it's a little bit of reflection of what's oddly going on in the country. You just, just a division, and you just sort of wonder how we're going to sort of pull together, because I think we're more split than we ever have been.
It's going to be something to watch. And Dave Cohen could be a swing voter. He could swing it against the mayor's coalition. We need to move on. Let's take a quick look at the race for Santa Clara County Supervisor District 3. That's Sunnyvale and Milpitas and East San Jose. Formerly Dave Cortese represented the district. Otto Lee handily beat Assemblyman Kansan-Chu 60% to 40%. That's a wipeout, a virtual landslide, certainly more than I expected. That's your district. What were you expecting?
Honestly, I actually thought Otto ran a very strong campaign. He was working hard. You can see him before the pandemic. You could see him everywhere, but even after the pandemic, you knew he was working. I definitely thought that Otto was outworking Kanson's campaign, but I did not expect these results, to be honest with you. When the initial results came out, I was surprised myself. But I got to tell you, just looking at kind of the effort and going out and seeing how much Otto was connecting with the community, I thought Otto ran a stronger campaign. But the one thing that he had to always kind of go up against was just name recognition.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Kanson's home is in Berryessa, right? So he many people, even when I was going door to door, right? Many folks were saying, asking me just like, hey, do you know Kanson, right? Those were definitely some big factors at play here. At the end of the day, what I think kind of happened here is that if there was any kind of restriction on Kansas's ability to go out and campaign at all, that was going to hurt him, because I think while Otto was definitely very aware and conscious of the pandemic restrictions, he did everything he could to make sure he went out there and communicated with voters as well.
Yeah, I think this is a case where a lot of us assumed Kanson had a better chance simply because he'd been in office so long, name was so well known. And here's an example of the difference an actual campaign makes, a really well-run campaign. And if you look at Otto's website, the range of endorsements is really impressive, a really active, excellent campaign that appears to have made a huge difference. Ken, anything to add to that?
Yeah, and maybe what you remember, did Otto put $300,000 of his own funds, or?
Oh, more like $400,000 loan.
Yeah, I definitely think he put a lot of money into his own campaign race, right?
Yeah, of course, which drove Kanson crazy. But yeah, a lot of missteps by Kanson. I mean, the whole thing about using state assembly, funds on some campaign literature, the AB5 vote dealing with affirmative action and comments that he might have made in the Chinese press, and I think it also showed that his support, even though he'd been in office for many years, was never very strong. He didn't really have a lot of great endorsements. He didn't really have a track record to run on. He never really was much of a policy guy.
Yeah.
So even though people might have heard his name, I don't think they felt particularly strong towards him. And Otto was able then to present himself in a much stronger way.
Okay, thank you guys. Let's move on to the state Senate race, District 15, where Dave Cortese beat Ann Ravel 54% to 46%. According to the results we have now, pretty solid victory. Here was a race between two Democrats, thanks to California's top two primary system. I think Ravel ran a strong campaign, a little stronger than I initially expected, but Cortese started with a big advantage in terms of decades in office, so he was way better known by voters. She had a challenge to overcome. If you look at the map of the outcome, Cortese won Central and East San Jose, same as in the primary. Ravel won the West Side, Saratoga, Los Gatos, Cupertino. So a real split in the district between East and West, but Cortese pulled it out. This was the most expensive state Senate campaign in California this year, maybe ever. I'm not sure about that, but the total spending was $8 million for this one Senate seat. And this is between two Democrats. It's not even a partisan contest. Cortese raised and spent over $2 million himself. Labor PACs supporting him spent $2 million. So there's $4 million for Cortese plus. Meanwhile, Ravel, most of us expected to be at a financial disadvantage, raised over $1 million herself, and business groups, including Lyft and Uber, spent $2.5 million to support Ravel. So lots of money. I will say, again, labor gave Cortese an advantage because of phone banks as well as mailings. And they sent hit pieces on Ravel that were, I think, effective with women over the issue of the recall of Judge Aaron Persky, which Ravel opposed for, I think, legitimate reasons, but it turned some women against her the way it was pitched in the hit pieces. And finally, the pandemic had to be a big advantage for her because she was the underdog again, and the underdog particularly needs the grassroots personal contact, events, and so on. So she was up against a big challenge, and she just wasn't able to surmount it. Cortese did all the right stuff, plus had plenty of money backing him and labor volunteers. Comments on that race? Are you in that?
Sure. Well, it wasn't, definitely wasn't my district, but I mean, living where I do, like, we're very familiar with Dave's, right? And actually, this is a dynamic that I thought kind of played out in the supervisor's race as well, right? Dave got a lot of support from the organizations that are based here in Santa Clara County, right? So he got labor support, he got local endorsements, and Rebel started building a lot of her momentum through after the primary. Getting the support of national Democrats like President Obama coming in to endorse her, right? So, we kind of saw the same thing happening in supervisor's race where, Kansas started pulling in the statewide endorsements. But, Otto was still trying to work and build that support among the organizations that work here in Santa Clara County. So, I mean, Ann definitely pulled out all the stops to get as many votes as she did. I think at the end of the day, besides having the great organization and the volunteers from labor, it was also just the fact that David had built his base here locally for a very long time.
Really good point, Ken.
Yeah, and it was, but it was always a San Jose seat, just because most of San Jose is in Senate District 15. And I was looking back at the mayor's race in 14 about where, with Dave and how he did with Sam. Dave won all of the east side and Sam won all of the west side, with 87 really being the dividing line. And looking at it now, Dave made progress in west of 87. And I think that enabled him to pick up the votes. They were San Jose votes, but surprisingly, sort of how there was that anti-San Jose sentiment that as you move to the West Valley cities, that Ann just swept, even though I don't think voters had ever really heard of her before, because she was not an elected official.
Yeah, that's also a super good point. Thank you. So we're going to close. We have a couple minutes left, so not much, but I wonder what surprised each of us in this election. I kind of think we've already talked about a lot of surprises, but what surprised me was 9 of 12 local tax measures passed. 9 of 12. And I thought this was going to be an anti-tax year. So I think that's really remarkable. Parcel taxes mostly, a couple of bond taxes, and it looks like Measure R, the regional taxes, right close to passing, right on the edge. So that was a surprise to me. Ken, what about you?
Yeah, and along the same lines, I was very active in the Measure T campaign. That was the extension of the parcel tax. It was just an extension. It wasn't an addition to the parcel tax.
Parcel tax for the Open Space Authority.
For the Open Space Authority. And, the early polling, there was a question of whether they were going to do the extension or add to how much the rate was. And everybody, no, it's a bad time, the economy, all these kind of issues. And so we just sort of were more conservative, even though we knew it was a presidential year. And it won with 81% of the vote. And now we sort of think, well, maybe we should have gone for more. And I think a lot of groups or cities decided not to go on because way back when, in June, when you sort of had to make this decision, people were worried about if anybody was going to vote for tax measures. Yeah.
We were down to 30 seconds. What surprised you?
Sure, I'll make it quick. What surprised me and probably shouldn't was Proposition 22 passing here locally in Santa Clara County and statewide. The measure was heavily funded by Uber and Lyft. You just see sometimes that people see such a huge aversion to massive amounts of spending the way that they did it, but apparently not in this case. And I think that the Prop 22 itself is going to have huge ramifications into future legislation.
Well, that and all the others we've talked about, I think a big theme in this whole election is money, 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 money. And with that, we're out of time. Huy Tran, Ken Yeager, thank you very much for a great show.
Always
Thanks, Terry.
We'll be back next month with San Jose's new council members as our guests. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can catch up on all of our previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for CreaTV San Jose. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching today.